All right. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this webinar on Local Law 97 compliance for industrial and manufacturing properties, which is presented by the New York City Department of Buildings, the New York City Accelerator, and the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority, known as NYSERDA. My name is Catherine Willis, and I'm an account manager for NYC Accelerator. Later in the webinar, I will share more information about the Accelerator. And up to this point, you may have heard a fair amount about Local Law 97, which is obviously the topic of our webinar today, and how it may impact industrial and manufacturing buildings. So to get us started, I'm going to go ahead and introduce my fellow speakers who will present on compliance pathways for industrial and manufacturing buildings. Here is today's agenda. As I said, we will have speakers from the Department of Buildings speak about compliance pathways for industrial and manufacturing properties. Then my colleague Simon and I will talk a little bit about the New York City Accelerator, what we are and how we can assist industrial and manufacturing properties. And then we'll hear from NYSERDA about incentives, including the FlexTech program. At the very end, we will have audience Q&A. So in the meantime, please put any questions that you want to have answered into the Q&A function of the, rather than the regular chat. And we will address as many as we can, either in, typed written form or answers during that Q&A portion at the end. And to, foresee a possible question, yes, we will be sharing the PowerPoint slides as well as a recording of the webinar afterwards. So let's go ahead and jump in and meet our speakers. First up, we're going to have Laura Popa, who is the Deputy Commissioner of the Bureau of Sustainability within the New York City Department of Buildings, as well as Holly Savoya, the Director of Outreach and Assistance for the Bureau of Sustainability within DOB. And then Beth Golub, the Director of Sustainability Policy and Legal Matters in the Department of Buildings. And finally, Emily Hoffman, the Director of Building Energy and Emissions Performance within DOB as well. After DOB has given their presentation, like I said, myself and Simon, the program manager, Simon Mugo, the program manager of the New York City Accelerator, will talk about how we can assist buildings. And we will end with Matthew Christopher, who is the Senior Project Manager for NYSERDA, to talk about incentive programs. So without further ado, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'll hand it over to Laura Popa for more information from the DOB.
Thanks, Catherine. All right. So, thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We wanted to note up front how important the industry and manufacturing sector is to New York City. And we know there are questions out there about how to comply with Local Law 97. And we're very hopeful that this webinar provides the answers and support needed. So as everyone knows, Local Law 97 covers all building emissions, and we recognize that fully decarbonizing equipment related to process loads presents unique challenges. NYSERDA, who will be speaking later, has done studies on challenges I&M buildings face with energy management, with the adoption of clean energy technologies. And the studies highlight that there are multiple pathways available for I&M buildings based on specific needs and use cases. So we encourage everyone here today to work with NYSERDA and, of course, New York City Accelerator to understand, what carbon reduction and energy saving opportunities may be available to you. Today, we're going to present on the multiple pathways available to I&M stakeholders to comply with Local Law 97. The vast majority of I&M buildings are already in compliance with the 2024 to 2029 emissions limits, and that is really great news. But whether it be for this upcoming report, due imminently or in preparation for 2030, we want to make sure you are knowledgeable about all the pathways that you can use to comply. And so Beth Golub will be taking you through that discussion. We're going to highlight the 320.7 adjustment process. This pathway allows building owners to apply for an adjustment to their emissions limit if they are affected by a physical condition that inhibits compliance. And this is known collectively as external constraints. So through this pathway, I&M buildings are going to be able to separate their process load from their regular building operations load and demonstrate they are doing what they can to decarbonize and to increase their energy efficiency. Know, and we're going to repeat this later several times, that a prerequisite for applying for the 320.7 adjustment is working with New York City Accelerator to pursue the appropriate incentives that is in the law and in the rules. Emily Huffman's going to explain the process for applying for this adjustment and the documentation you need in much greater detail. So before I turn it over to Hollis Savoya, I just want to emphasize that we are eager to work with all building owners to be as supportive as possible to achieve compliance. So thank you again, and I'll pass the baton to Holly.
Thank you, Laura. I'm Holly Savoya. I'm the Director of Sustainability Outreach and Assistance, and I'm just going to take you very quickly through our timeline. You've probably seen this before, but basically what this does it outlines from the time that the law was passed through the work that we did with the advisory board, some of the adjustments programs, and then the successive compliance periods taking us through to carbon neutrality by 2050. Now, what you've all been waiting for, and I'm so excited because I get to be the one to announce it, is that the first week of March is what we are looking for the reporting portal to go live. From the first week of March through June 30th is when the reporting period will take place. And the first time that you can begin to submit an extension request would be April 1st. The deadline to submit reports is May 1st. However, there is an automatic grace period that is built into the law that will allow you to submit your report by June 30th without penalty. June 30th is the last day to submit if you have not applied for an extension, and it's also the last day to submit for an extension if you need time beyond June 30th, and that extension will give you until August 29th. So now I'm going to turn it to my colleague, Beth.
Thank you, Holly. Hi, I'm Beth Golub. I'm the Director of Policy and Legal Matters in the Sustainability Bureau here at DOB, and I'll be talking about the toolbox that is available to I&M buildings specifically to achieve compliance with Local Law 97. So this is a list of those tools, those pathways to compliance, and then I'll have a few more slides that go in depth on these items. The first is to straightforward implement the upgrades at the building that will reduce emissions and increase energy efficiency. Next, for a building that is working to achieve compliance but hasn't achieved compliance yet, our rules define what would be considered good faith efforts being made towards achieving compliance, such that a building would receive a mediated resolution from DOB rather than a penalty for being out of compliance. Another pathway to compliance is to purchase offsets for the amount that's allowable in Local Law 97 to reduce the actual emissions in that annual emissions report. I'll talk about that more as well. Purchasing RECs is also a way to comply with the law. RECs are not, the RECs that are allowable for Local Law 97 compliance are not available yet, but when they do become available, that will be a pathway to compliance. And then there is this new 320.7 adjustment opportunity, of which there are two flavors. I'll talk about one, and then Emily will go into the other a bit more in depth. Okay, next slide, please. Oh, one back. Okay, great, thanks. So for the actual work that would happen at a building, the upgrades at a building to reduce emissions and increase efficiency, right away, we recommend engaging with New York City Accelerator. The Accelerator can help a building identify the scope of work that can be pursued to achieve compliance with the emissions limit. The Accelerator will help identify service providers for implementing that work, and Accelerator will also help identify and pursue the incentives that are available for the work and any financing opportunities that will support a building pursuing that work. So the Accelerator is an amazing resource, and it's the place the buildings should get started. Also in our rules and in the law, in conjunction with the rules, there are deduction opportunities, ways to reduce the emissions that a building is creating. That would be distributed energy resources such as solar or energy storage, and also the beneficial electrification credit. So both of those items are further detailed in our rules and also in the Article 320 guide. There are also some alternative coefficients for various types of compliance. One is an alternative coefficient for shared energy systems for how those systems are reported. There's a methodology for reporting time of use. There is an opportunity for alternative coefficients for biofuels and for bulk fuels. And so for more details about reporting those types of compliance, again, see our Article 320 guide. And finally, there is an alternative methodology for cogeneration systems, which was just finalized in the third rule package that took effect in January. Okay, next slide. So for a building that is working to achieve compliance but has not reached compliance with the emissions limit yet, DOB might offer that building a mediated resolution instead of issuing penalties if that building demonstrates what DOB has defined as good faith efforts in our rule. So in order to qualify as demonstrating good faith efforts, a building has to do everything on the left and at least one thing on the right. So the building has to have submitted its Local Law 97 annual building emissions report for that year. The building has to have submitted the benchmarking report pursuant to Local Law 84, and the building has to be in compliance with Local Law 88, which includes upgrading lighting and installing submeters. Then the building can do one of the items on the right, which would include submitting a decarbonization plan, and I'll go into more detail about what that entails on the next slide. The building can demonstrate that the work to achieve compliance is underway by having a completed application approved by DOB for that work that will amount to reduced emissions at the building. The building can show that it is working with the utility, with Con Ed, to grow the electricity service at the building to support transitioning from fossil fuel equipment to electric equipment. The building can show that at some point in the compliance period, so this would not be applicable to the 2025 report, but for later year reports, that the building was in compliance with the emissions limit, but then some circumstance that the building has changed such that the building has come out of compliance with the emissions limit and the building needs to work to come back into compliance. And finally, there is an ability for critical facilities to demonstrate that the payment of a penalty would keep them from providing life-saving services, and that's specifically available to critical facilities. Next slide. Thank you. So the good faith efforts pathway for submitting a decarbonization plan actually spans the whole first compliance period. And so what that entails is with the Local Law 97 annual building emissions report that's submitted with this May 1st deadline of this year, the building would also provide a decarbonization plan, including an energy audit for the building, an inventory of the major equipment at the building, and a list of alterations that will be needed to achieve compliance with the emissions limit that are available at each compliance period, and the work that will happen over time to achieve those limits, including the financing plan for those works. Additionally, while recs are not available yet, they are expected to be available later in this compliance period. But if a building is pursuing the decarbonization plan good faith efforts, they cannot use recs to achieve compliance in this 24 to 29 compliance period. So if the building submits their decarbonization plan by May 1st of this year, or with this report due this year, then that building has until they submit the report in 2027, which reflects 2026 emissions, to show that the building has achieved compliance with the 24 to 29 emissions limit. And then in the report that is submitted in 2028, the building needs to demonstrate that the work to achieve compliance with the 2030 emissions limit is already underway. And if this schedule is adhered to, then DOB will issue a mediated resolution to this building saying that DOB will not issue penalties as long as the building continues to demonstrate compliance with this compliance schedule. And if at any point the building does not demonstrate compliance with this schedule, DOB can go back and issue penalties for any noncompliance that have not yet been issued. Okay, next slide. Another path to achieving compliance is to purchase offsets. So DOB, in collaboration with HPD, the Department of Housing Preservation and Development, has established an offset program known as the Affordable Housing Reinvestment Fund. Local Law 97 allows buildings to purchase offsets for up to 10% of the building's emissions limit. So if a building has 100 tons of emissions, if a building has 110 tons of emissions and the emissions limit is 100, 10% of the emissions limit is 10, and a building can purchase those 10 offsets to deduct those 10 emissions that are above the limit and be in compliance with the emissions limit. And the way that this works is we have a third-party administrator administering the fund. There will be more released very soon about who the third-party administrator is and the process for purchasing offsets with the third-party administrator, the fund administrator. But what happens is the building goes to the fund administrator, tells them the amount of the purchase, and then that purchase automatically gets incorporated into the building's compliance report in our Local Law 97 compliance portal, and reduces emissions for the amount of that purchase up to 10% of the building's emissions limit. And those funds are used in collaboration with HPD to do decarbonization work at buildings that aren't subject to Local Law 97's emissions limits. So our affordable housing building stock here in New York City gets decarbonized using using funds that are through this Local Law 97 compliance offsets. And again, there will be more information, including a guide specifically on how to purchase offsets and more information about those offsets generally forthcoming. Okay, next slide. So now we have the 320.7 adjustment opportunity. And so under 320.7, there are two adjustment opportunities. One is the adjustment for external constraints, which Emily Hoffman is going to go into more detail on. And the other is an adjustment in the event of financial constraints. And a building might face either of those. And so a building would be able to apply for either of those. And this shows that all other buildings is highlighted because this webinar focusing on I&M buildings are most likely to be in this category. There wouldn't be condos and co-ops or owned by nonprofits or otherwise involved in an affordable housing regulatory agreement, though they might have no debt. And what that left column shows is that the ownership model of the building, and then the center columns describes what that type of building would need a certified public accountant to confirm that they meet that standard in order to get 1 year of an adjusted emissions limit that would match the actual emissions of the building so that the building wouldn't have a penalty for that year. In this application process, a building does need to engage with the New York City Accelerator to identify a scope of work, to achieve compliance, and to also identify and pursue incentives for that work. And then the building can say that a CPA, a certified public accountant, demonstrates that they meet the standard, so they can't pursue that scope of work at this moment. But DOB can see that as soon as that building does not meet that standard, they can pursue the scope of work that they've worked with the accelerator to identify, including service providers and all available incentives to help cover that work and financing. So there will be more webinars on this adjustment process, but for now, I will pass it over to Emily to talk more about the 320.7 adjustment for external constraints.
All right, thank you, Beth. So I'm going to dive into the details on this what's required for this 320.7 adjustment if you're applying for it at, for your local law 97 building, and, just really go into the specifics of what's required. So as Laura was highlighting, the external constraint adjustment is for buildings that are subject to another provision of law, or they have a physical condition that directly prevents compliance with the local law 97 emission limits, as determined by rule or by code. So in the law, some of these examples are historic preservation, and then we're also considering industrial and manufacturing process loads for bespoke equipment within those buildings. Today, we're just going to focus on industrial and manufacturing process loads and how that, if you have that specific external constraint, how you would go forward and apply for this adjustment. And I just want to point out that when we're talking about process loads, this is, specific equipment that's fixed within the building. The fixed part is important, and that it's specific to the industrial process or the product that's being manufactured. So the equipment must be directly related to that specific process that's being created in one of these buildings. This is not intended to have any type of plug load. Go for this external constraint. This is for very specific and narrow types of buildings and loads. So very highly, the high level, the approach for this adjustment is you have to consider the emissions specific for that process load and for the rest of the building operation. So you first have to separate out those specific process loads, make sure the one for the building operations is within the limit in the law, and separately consider the, for the equipment. This is it's a 3-year maximum adjusted limit. So if you apply this year, it would be for the 2024 calendar year of data, the 2025 and 2026. If you wanted to extend this adjustment, you would have to apply again. And so you'll see in our slides as we go ahead, we have sort of an abbreviated requirement for this first compliance year, knowing that this is, was just released in our rules and just became effective. And, so we're going to go over what's required this reporting year and then in the future years. Next slide, please. Okay, so the general steps for demonstrating eligibility of this adjustment, the first thing you have to do if you're interested in pursuing this is engage with the New York City Accelerator. The building owner will be assigned a New York City Accelerator account manager, and they will be working together. First, they'll be doing a building needs assessment, completing a building information form. So this would be assessing the current local law 97 compliance based on previous benchmarking data, going over any local law 87 audits that have been, performed on the building, or any other, anything else that's available, and going through that needs assessment for the particular building. The next thing that's really important for this particular adjustment is that you work with the accelerator to identify any and all incentives and financing opportunities that are available. So that's in the best interest of the building owner to pursue those incentives and work towards decarbonization. The accelerator will also identify service providers for the building owner to work with. So all that has to happen in step 1. Then in step 2, you work with the accelerator and a registered design professional to verify the qualifying circumstance to make sure that you're eligible for this adjustment, and then work through completing the documentation that's required. I'm going to go through in detail what the documentation requirements are. Once those first 2 steps are done, then the check on this is a form. You have to get this APA form. It's an adjustment process attestation form. New York City Accelerator, your account manager will verify and sign off that you've worked with them and that you have identified the relevant incentives and are pursuing them if available. And then step 4 is submitting your application to DOB with all of these requirements. So we'll go through all this in detail. Next slide, please. Okay, so for the submission itself, and this is outlined in Rule 103-12, you have to first confirm the building was in existence prior to November 15th, 2019. You have to attest to that, just a checkbox. You have to have submitted your Local Law 97 annual emissions report for this year in 2025 for the 2024 reporting year. So that has to be done. Once you submit that in our BEAM platform, likely if you're going for this adjustment, you'll see you're over the limit. There will be an estimated penalty that's owed. That part is required first. That's a prerequisite. Then you have to submit your APA form. Again, this is the one that Accelerator attests to, that you've worked with them, identified all your incentives. You have to have also purchased the maximum amount of offsets. That would be 10% of your emissions limit in your building. So that's the emissions limit prior to any adjustment. If you're pursuing this one or you've done your 320.8 adjustment, you look at the unadjusted limit and you're required to purchase the maximum, which is 10% of that limit. Next, you have to propose what your 320.7 adjusted limit would be and enter that proposed value in our reporting portal. That proposed limit, we're going to go through an example on what that would look like, but the RDP essentially is proposing this limit, and we'll go through an example of what that is. And then the rule requires that you have a technical explanation of your external constraint as well as a decarbonization plan. So we need that supporting documentation uploaded as well. And then the final check is that your RDP attests to all this information, is truthful and accurate, and uploads an attestation form signed by the RDP and the owner. Next slide. Okay, so the proposed adjusted limit, here's an example of an I&M building. So like we said, we're separating out what the building operations emissions and the the fixed bespoke equipment for the I&M facility, those emissions. So for this example building, you can see if the building calculated their emissions limit with the factors that are in the law, say the emissions limit came out to 150 tons of carbon equivalent. But this particular building was operating at 2,500 tons of carbon. So the first step would be breaking out the carbon emissions for the building operations and for the for the process equipment. So in this example, we're saying that 100 tons comes from the building emissions, 2,400 tons of carbon comes from that process equipment itself. So the adjusted limit, the way we would look at the adjusted limit is taking the original 97 limit based on the factors in the law, which in this example is 150, and adding that process equipment, the emissions related to the process equipment. So in this example, that would come out to 2,550. A check that we will do and could impact the adjusted limit is whether the building operations carbon is less than the limit itself. If the building emissions is higher than that limit, then you should take that into account into your adjusted limit and reduce it based on the overage there. Then your total limit, in this example, the total emissions would be 2,500, your adjusted limit would be 2,550, and that is, what we would review. And if all the documentation was there, then we would approve. And just wanted to, we had another adjustment program that has since closed that, we're still going through reviewing applications, but that particular adjustment is looking at the 2018 calendar emissions, taking 70% of that year's annual emissions, and that would be the adjusted limit. So in most cases, maybe not all, in most cases, the 320.7 adjusted limit, may be higher, but you could, if you have both limits, you can choose which one to use. They're not additive; they're separate adjusted limits, but you can apply for, either one. There's just one, that you would that would be used for reporting. Next slide. Okay, so the supporting documentation requirements, these come from, just high level, they come from our Rule 103-12. In there is required to be a detailed description of the provision of law or physical condition of the building that prevents compliance with the annual buildings limit. Next, you have to have a technical explanation of how that condition is preventing strict compliance with the limit. And then we want to see a plan for decarbonization. So the next few slides are going to talk through exactly what type of supporting documentation we want to see to, to show that these requirements are met. And like I mentioned, there's a certain criteria that we'll be evaluating with this first year of reporting. And then starting in 2026 for the 2025 calendar year data, there will be another set that is more detailed. Next slide. Okay, so the first requirement in the rule is a brief written statement outlining the physical constraint preventing compliance and an explanation why the constraint prevents compliance. So for I&M buildings, we want a description of that physical constraint, which in most cases would be a description of what the bespoke process equipment is, and then an explanation of why this equipment in particular is important for the industrial manufacturing processes, and why having this equipment, why you have to have this equipment for those procedures, and then why you can't meet the strict compliance. So that's the same documentation this year and going forward. Next slide. So we need that description first, and then we get into the decarbonization plan criteria. So the first part of the decarb plan that we want to see is we want the documentation of essentially any improvements, any carbon reduction or energy efficiency improvements or measures that have been implemented since 2019. So this is called out in the rule. So, we want essentially a list of all the measures that were implemented and the reductions, carbon reductions and energy efficiency associated with each one of those measures. So what's actually been implemented, and then how much the calculated percentage decrease in building emissions from 2019 to 2024. And that can be based on, benchmarking data or other data that you have available. That will be the same requirement this year and after 2025. Next slide. Okay, the next part of the decarb plan is to document the emissions limit, both with the, we want you to document the limit, the annual emissions and energy consumption, both with the constraint and without the constraint. So this is essentially isolating the building operations from the process equipment. We want the emissions limit identified for this compliance year and this compliance cycle and the next compliance cycle, so 2024 to 2029, as well as 2030 to 2034. And then also identify the current annual emissions, so calendar year 2024 annual emissions, energy consumption and associated fuel use with the constraint and without the constraint. So to separate out the constraint energy consumption, you can either do that by submetering, and you'll have to provide, the method that you use by, estimation. The RDP does an analysis, or if, there's a sales tax exemption for industrial manufacturing for production, any other method that is allowable to determine the, energy associated with that sales tax exemption would also be applicable in this case. We would accept that. These are the same requirements, no matter when you file. Next slide. So next in the decarb plan, You need to document your current operational status, including all your building systems. This is, essentially like an energy audit. This particular year, we're really just looking high level. We want to identify all of the base building equipment, including the process load equipment. If there's any tenants there, any type of that equipment, with the associated fuel type. So is it running on oil? Is it running on gas, electric, that kind of thing? Very high level. If you have a Local Law 87 report that was done within the last 4 years, that would also be acceptable to meet this requirement. If you've done any other incentive program where you have an audit or a decarb plan, like NYSERDA Flex Tech, that would be acceptable. Or if you've already applied for a 320.8, a Local Law 97 320.8 adjustment, that application can be used to meet this documentation requirement, because in that application you are required to, identify this equipment. So that's required just for this first reporting year. Starting next year, we want, we're basically mimicking the decarb plan requirements that are in the good faith effort pathway, where we want an inventory of all the HVAC, domestic hot water, electrical equipment, lighting equipment, conveyance equipment, and along with that inventory, we want the date of installation and whether or not it's the energy shared between buildings. We also want an energy and carbon use breakdown of all the end uses within the building. So including, not limited to, lighting, heating, cooling, ventilation, pumps, process plug loads, domestic hot water. So typical stuff you'd find in an audit. It's just this year we're going, more high level. That will be acceptable for this year only. Next slide. And then the next requirement that's in the rule is to document measures that the owner will implement to achieve decarbonization to the maximum extent possible. This year, we want you to identify measures that could be implemented. We want to look at the building operations by itself. What decarbonization measures can you do for the building operations, such as, replacing the heating and cooling equipment, electrification, things like that. But we also want to see a plan on how you would decarbonize the process load equipment. So again, this first year, we're just looking really high level. Like, are the measures that you're considering looking at electrification, envelope enhancements, any sort of improvements to the process equipment itself? Are you looking at switching fuels to something less carbon intensive? Do you have room for, reducing energy consumption itself? Are there new technologies that could achieve carbon reduction? So high level description of which measures, could be applied in your particular building. And then an alternative, if you've already applied for the 320.8 adjustment, you've already completed this 2030 emissions reduction plan, so you can submit that. We just want to see an implementation status of each one of the measures that are in there, whether they've been implemented or, what the plan is for there. So first year, it's high level. Starting next year, we would, essentially require the same thing, except that for each one of those measures that are identified, really dig into what is the estimated energy and carbon savings, the cost of that equipment or method, and the anticipated installation date of when that would happen. Next slide. And then the last kind of bullet item under the decarb plan criteria, you have to document alternative methods considered to reduce emissions involving the external constraint. So this is really opening it up to what other alternative measures have you considered, both with and without the external constraint. And if they're not included in the decarb plan, why not? Give us a reason why they were deemed not reasonable to implement. And that would be the same after 2025. Next slide. So those are all the supporting documentation requirements. As far as doing the actual submission in the BEAM platform, I'm just showing you quickly what this would look like for the 320.7 adjustment application. We'll be having, a lot more in-depth review of how to use this platform, in a few weeks. But for this particular adjustment application, this is the required information. So you have to enter your building address, your BBL, BIN, select the adjustment that best describes this building. So for, what we're talking about today is the external constraint. The other option that Beth mentioned was the financial constraint. So you select external constraint, you upload your supporting documentation. So those were all of the things that I was, describing in the decarb plan and the technical explanation, as well as the ACA form that you get from Accelerator. All of that has to be uploaded into the system. There's a checkbox below. Please confirm that the building has met all these conditions, and these conditions are that the building was in existence prior to November 15, 2019, that the emissions report for last year was submitted, and that the offsets have been purchased. Next slide, please. So that's just a checkbox. The RDP then has to enter license information, confirm that they've reviewed the report, upload an attestation that will be provided by DOB. The report we didn't mention this, but to file this adjustment, there is a filing fee. So you'll have to go in DOB now, pay that filing fee, enter that payment confirmation number in BEAM, enter your proposed adjusted limit, and then submit the ticket. So, really entering this information into the system itself, you're looking at, just building identification, the BBL lot, BBL, BIN, address, a couple of attestation checks, your supporting documentation uploads, and inputting the value of your proposed limit. Then you submit that ticket to DOB. We will review the application and either approve or amend or deny that adjusted limit. Next, and I believe that's my last slide. Great, and thank you. And I will pass it over to the accelerator, who will go into more detail on helping you guys out with this pathway.
Thank you so much, Emily, and thank you to the whole DOB team for that very in-depth presentation. Also, thank you to the audience for continuing to put questions in the Q&A. Many of them have been answered, and more of them may be answered in the following presentations. So as Emily said, I will now share my screen to tell you a little bit more about the accelerator. So many of you may already be familiar with the accelerator, but for those of you who aren't, or to find out more about how we are supporting these initiatives, we wanted to provide you with a little bit more information. So basically, we are a free program out of the Mayor's Office of Climate and Environmental Justice. We are aligned with the goals of Local Law 97, including decarbonizing or becoming carbon neutral by 2050. And the ways that we can do that is to provide free assistance to buildings of really many sizes, even ones that are too small for Local Law 97 compliance. But we're especially here to assist buildings like the ones represented in this audience, who may be covered by Local Law 97, and that includes industrial and manufacturing properties. So how exactly do we do this? We provide that free assistance that I mentioned. I'll tell you in a moment exactly how to get in touch with us and to start the process of working towards your Local Law 97 compliance and any other projects you may have in mind. To do that, we will help assess your building and identify potential upgrade projects, again, whether those pertain specifically to these adjustments or Local Law 97 compliance in general, or even beyond Local Law 97. We have no cost trainings available for operators of buildings and other stakeholders within the building sector. And as was previously mentioned, we will help connect you to service providers who can actually carry out these projects, in addition to applicable incentives and financing to make these projects feasible. So just a quick summary of how we work or who we work with. Any privately owned building within the 5 boroughs that is 5,000 square feet or more. If you happen to have buildings that are smaller, you can still bring them to us and we will refer them to a partner organization. I'll share our phone number at the end of this presentation, as well as other ways to connect with us and get assigned a dedicated account manager, someone like me who can help you. And you'll receive that personalized, customized, absolutely free and objective assistance. And as I've already said, it's a totally free program, totally voluntary. You can use us as much or as little as you want. No catch or commitment, other than if you're required to, of course, work with us for the 320.7 external constraints adjustment. The constraints adjustment applications. So very brief kind of what does the experience actually look like working with the accelerator? You're in step 1 right now, which is on the far left here, learning about the program. Then, as has been indicated, we'll do a building needs assessment with you, find out what's going on with your building. Where does it necessarily stand in terms of local law 97 compliance, and what opportunities there may be to decarbonize and implement measures. Then once those energy measures have been decided upon by you with the assistance of your registered design professional, then we help you also with the implementation part of it, which is identifying service providers and financing and incentives to actually carry out the projects. And furthermore, we want to stay in touch, find out how things are going, and be available to you again in the future, as much or as little as you would like to reach out to us. I just wanted to include this slide in the presentation as well. As you can see, our friends at the New York City Sustainability Help Center have this great graphic that illustrates how the various local laws that your building may be covered with all connect to each other. And so in a similar way that the Accelerator and DOB and other organizations exist with various partners and things in this kind of ecosystem of building decarbonization assistance, so too do all of these local laws interact with and support one another. So the filing that's about to happen for local law 97 with regard to reporting your carbon emissions will then guide you towards how to reduce those emissions and all of the necessary laws in between that provide, again, information about your building, such as the local law 87 energy audits that are required for buildings 50,000 square feet and above. We have local law 96 that established the PACE financing program, which I'll touch very briefly on later on, as well as local law 88, the compliance of which is due this May as well. So if you are unfamiliar with 88, please get in touch with us too. We are happy and able to help you with any of these local law compliance issues. And furthermore, once you've implemented various projects and complied with other related local laws, then it comes back around to local law 97 reporting next year to see how your building is doing and where further you may need to go from there. I also, really wanted to highlight the service provider network that we have available completely, for free within our program. So you can actually find a contractor tool on our website, accelerator.nyc. Scroll down till you see the little hard hat person. And this network continues to grow. So it includes many service providers who work, again, both with local law 97 compliance projects, as well as ones that may be, tangentially related. But there are specific categories for searching for registered design professionals, local law 97 assistants, and things like that. And since we're in a room of industrial and manufacturing buildings, I wanted to mention two things. One is green leasing, which is also known as high performance leasing or energy aligned leasing, is increasingly important to consider if you and your tenants need to get on the same page about this non-process load issue pertaining to local law 97 compliance and related adjustment applications and that sort of thing. So there's an ability to look up that, and also like within like a legal service provider search. And furthermore, I will also share a little bit of information about our solar specialty within the accelerator. We have specialists pertaining to solar, affordable housing, financing, new construction, all kinds of things that may or may not impact you and your buildings. But just wanted to encourage you to look at all of the free resources we do have available on our website. There are those trainings, there are, educational information about local law 97 and other building laws, and events like this you can find on our event calendar part of the website too. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it back to the Accelerator's program manager, Simon Mugo, to tell you more about how the Accelerator might be able to assist you specifically with local law 97 compliance assistance.
Yeah, thanks, Catherine. And just a quick follow-up on the Finder Provider or Service Provider program that we have on our website. I did see through the chat that there are a number of service providers or vendors on this call today. So if you are one of those vendors and you're not in our network, I would highly recommend that you reach out to us. The enrollment process is pretty straightforward and very simple. As Catherine mentioned, we are looking to grow the network. We already have well over 280 service providers already in the program, and would love to have more vendors who are able to help buildings, whether they're industrial or any other typology throughout the city. We're looking to grow that network to have more providers available. And so over the next few slides, I'm going to cover a bit more detail as far as what the adjustment process looks like from the accelerator standpoint. So I know Emily from DOB provided a great overview of all the steps that are required to complete the process. But over the next few slides, and Catherine, if you can move forward to the next slide, I'd like to cover sort of a bit more detail in terms of what to expect by engaging the accelerator program and working with us to complete your application. So typically the first step in the process is to connect with our team, where you'll be connected with or assigned an account manager. I know a number of you have already engaged with the program and might already have an account manager. And if you are one of those buildings, then the process is even simpler. In that case, you would just reach out to your account manager and let them know that you are interested in pursuing this adjustment. They would then begin to work with you to complete the necessary steps to get your application ready before the deadline is due. But if you have not contacted the accelerator or engaged with the program previously, we would typically work with you, assign an account manager, and have an intake conversation. This could be either in person or a phone or a Zoom call, where we would complete the building needs assessment. So this process is really straightforward, and the idea is to get a better understanding of the systems that you have within your building and any challenges that you might be facing. So some of the questions that we might ask throughout the process is if you've ever replaced your lighting, the age of your boiler, or any concerns that you have within the building, whether it's overheating, underheating, or other concerns that may have not been captured in a previous audit. If you do have an audit, we would then review the audit depending on how, when the audit was completed. There might have been changes within the incentive networks in terms of incentives that are offered by the utilities or NYSERDA, who you'll hear from later on in the presentation. But the idea is that your account manager would review the results or the inputs that you provide through the needs assessment, as well as reviewing any local law 87 audits or decarb plans that you might have previously developed to see if there's any new information that could be more useful or timely to help reduce the cost of implementing these measures. At that point, we would also discuss any financing opportunities. We do have a finance specialist on our team who can help you navigate any financing needs that you might have for your building. Lastly, would help you identify the relevant service providers. As I mentioned, we do have a pretty extensive service provider network. So if you don't have an RDP, we can help you find one. If you do have an RDP, we can work with them to ensure that they understand the adjustment process and all the documentation that's required. Um, in terms of the second step, it's really to identify a RDP and work with that RDP to complete the application. As Emily mentioned early in the presentation, you really have to segment the emissions to distinguish the process loads from the building loads, and that's really the expertise of an RDP that would be required to make that determination and do the necessary calculations to identify which emissions are assigned to or as a result of your process load rather than your base building systems. If you can move forward to the next slide. So this this brings us to step 3, which is the final step from our perspective within the accelerator. So at this stage, we'd work with you to complete and verify your adjustment process attestation form. This process involves completing the form through a meeting or conversation between yourself and the account manager. During this time, would verify that all the ECMs or energy conservation measures that you've discussed with your account manager are listed fully in that form. So you might be interested in pursuing solar, might be interested in installing heat pumps or other energy conservation measures. But the idea is that we would encapsulate or identify all of those ECMs that you're willing and interested in pursuing, and identifying a full list of incentives that are relevant for that building. So as the accelerator, we work very closely with Con Edison, National Grid, NYSERDA, and other incentive providers to make sure that we give you the correct information and give you the timely information that can help you reduce the cost of implementing these measures. So through that conversation, we'll ensure that the form has the full list of ECMs, which is critical, as well as the full list of incentives that have been identified by your account manager, at which point you would send the form to the account manager, providing that information, and the account manager would review, make sure everything is accurate, and if so, they would provide you with an email confirmation stating that they have reviewed the measures and that everything that was discussed has been captured within the form. And you can use that at a later date as proof that you have engaged the accelerator and that you fulfilled this requirement, which is identifying the incentives and have the necessary information to pursue those incentives. So at this point, the building owner would then, keep the email as proof and be able to share that at any point with DOB, and we would provide that information as well to your RDP, who ultimately would be the entity or the individual who would be submitting that form. And at any point throughout the process, if you have any questions, your account manager can help you navigate the process through engaging service providers, engaging incentive providers, as well as working with your RDP to provide any information that might be missing. And that being said, I alluded to the fact that there are incentive providers that we work with. So I'll hand it back to Catherine to give you more of an overview of the types of incentives that we work with. And I'll caveat that by saying that this is not an exhaustive list. It's just a snapshot to give you an idea of the types of programs that might be available to you and your building. Catherine?
Thank you, Simon. Yes. So as Simon mentioned, this is just an example, like a smattering of, potentially available incentive programs with it, that are available to New York City buildings. Certainly the attestation form will have more and that will be, relevant to your building. So stay tuned for that. Just wanted to share a few starting ones. I also had mentioned the solar specialists that are available to speak with you on our team, with many industrial and manufacturing buildings being rather low-lying and in outer boroughs where perhaps they have less shade, conflict with nearby buildings and that sort of thing. Solar is definitely an attractive option for a lot of buildings, and we provide free solar feasibility assessments. So that's definitely something to have as a conversation with your account manager when you're assigned one by the accelerator. And all it takes is 12 months of your electric bills for our solar team to put that together for you. So it's a very valuable report. And last but not least, I did want to just shout out our financing specialty team as well. They are experts on many financing opportunities for different kinds of buildings, whether you are PACE eligible or not, pertaining to your specific situation, perhaps with your mortgage lender and other entities. So feel free to get in touch. Again, all of this assistance is free of charge. And so I would like to now display that contact information I mentioned, accelerator.nyc, or email info@accelerator.nyc. And I am now happy to hand it off to Matthew Christopher from NYSERDA to speak more about their programs.
Great, thanks, Catherine. Just share my screen here. All right. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matt Christopher. I'm a senior project manager with NYSERDA's Clean and Resilient Buildings team. I oversee and work with a team who manages a number of NYSERDA's technical assistance offerings, one of which is NYSERDA's FlexTech program, which I'll talk to you guys more about today. For those of you who may not be familiar, NYSERDA is a public benefit corporation who offers objective information and analysis, as well as innovative programs and technical expertise to help New Yorkers increase energy efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. So now I'll just jump back over to my slide. Just bear with me one sec. Okay. So today I'm going to talk to you about a couple things. I'm going to start with FlexTech. FlexTech is a technical assistance program. We provide a cost share for technical assistance. Oftentimes that cost share is up to 50% of the study cost or of the technical assistance cost. It does fluctuate depending on the services that are requested. So excuse me, on the sector that you're requesting services for. So for example, most commercial buildings, it's a 50% cost share. Most industrial buildings as well. We do have some caveats for hospitals, affordable multifamily, things of that nature. So if you ever have questions on what specific cost share would be applicable to your building, you can always reach out to us directly. The way the program works, we provide cost share for various technical assistance services. So there's an example of a few different services on your screen here. We've funded energy studies, decarbonization planning, energy master planning, retro commissioning analysis, all of the above. So, related to the topic today, the decarbonization requirement for Local Law 97 as a compliance pathway, that is something that we would provide cost share for. So as you're working with New York City Accelerator, you would bring a scope of work outlining what you will conduct as part of that decarbonization plan. And then you could submit an application package to NYSERDA's FlexTech program, and we would provide cost share to help offset the cost of developing that decarbonization plan. Some basic eligibility requirements for the FlexTech program. So we do have funding available for commercial, industrial, institutional, which we consider P12 schools, as well as colleges and universities, and multifamily customers. It is critical that customers contribute to the systems benefit charge, or the SBC charge, on your electric utility bill. If you don't, please still reach out. There are some scenarios where we may still be able to provide funding, but that is generally the rule of thumb as it relates to eligibility. In addition to that, we do ask that you have not completed a similar study within the last 3 years at your facility, and that the facility is occupied for a minimum of 12 months. So this is an existing buildings program. If you have done a study in the last 3 years and you're not sure if your new scope of work would be too close to what you previously did, just submit the scope of work. We'll assign it to a NYSERDA project manager, and we can navigate the specifics and just determine if portions of your scope would be eligible, or maybe the whole thing would be, if the scope is deviates from the study you did years ago. How to apply? First step is going to be choose a consultant. So you can work with a NYSERDA FlexTech consultant. We do have a list of consultants on our website who were competitively selected and awarded contracts to perform work through the FlexTech program, but that is not a requirement. You can also use an independent consultant of your choosing. They can also bring a study into the program, and you can also still receive cost share while working with that consultant. Step 2, you'd submit your application. So you can apply online now. And for more information on what that application process looks like, you can follow the user guide link in the slide in front of you, and that'll show you what's required, how to submit, and all the information you'll need to have up front in order to submit the project. The completed application package. So you would need to sign the application. You can sign that electronically or wet signature and just upload it to Salesforce. We also need the scope of work for the study that you'll be conducting. We'll review that scope of work with you and negotiate on eligibility. New York City Accelerator can also help you establish that scope of work. So I would encourage you to collaborate with them, and they can also participate as NYSERDA collaborates as well. We do conduct scoping calls for all of our projects. So the consultant, the customer, and a NYSERDA project manager will get on a call and discuss the scope of work, make sure everyone's on the same page. New York City Accelerator, your account managers are more than welcome to attend those calls as well. And then the last thing we need is a budget. So an outline of what the consultant's fees will be to perform the technical assistance. So I just wanted to show the group here a case study of a project that came through the FlexTech program. I recognize this is a commercial building. We do have industrial funding available as well, and have funded many projects in that sector. But this particular project was a collaboration between Empire State Realty Trust and Borough Happold as their consulting engineer. And through this project, they conducted a decarbonization study. And at the end of the day, ESRT wanted to develop a business case for emissions reduction. And in order to do that, they needed, detailed technical assistance. So Borough Happold was able to put together a study for them that outlined a 2-phased approach. Phase 1 was electrifying the building's steam boiler plant with air-to-water heat pumps. That particular phase anticipated roughly an $80,000 reduction in annual natural gas expenditures, and then also roughly 6,200 MMBTUs of natural gas use. So a pretty significant reduction there. There was also a second phase to this project, which included additional air-to-water rooftop units to be installed starting in 2030. And that particular portion of the scope would then take the rest of the heating and cooling loads over and run those via heat pumps. So at the conclusion of phase 2, there's an estimated 300 metric tons of CO2 anticipated to be reduced from this project. And we did provide a cost share. It was a 50% cost share on this study. So pivoting from the FlexTech program. So the FlexTech program is the upfront technical assistance support. So your study, your planning, et cetera. I would say, generally speaking, NYSERDA does not offer incentives for installation in the same capacity that we used to. In most cases, you're going to go to your utility for those incentives. However, we do run various competitive solicitations where we will have money that we put into the market for the installation of projects. So I'm going to talk to you quickly about the Commercial Industrial Carbon Challenge. This is an upcoming competitive solicitation that we typically launch mid to late May, and we solicit proposals through the end of July. So this particular program has $10 million available for projects that reduce greenhouse gas emissions. And this is specific to commercial and industrial businesses in New York. So to be eligible, an applicant must be either a commercial and industrial building located in New York, or a services or solution provider working with a commercial industrial customer. In other words, a consultant who's working on that project, or another service provider. It is important to note that we do consider schools, universities, municipal institutions, commercial for the purposes of this program. So applications can include a single project or a portfolio of projects, as long as the cumulative impact is at least 25,000 tons of CO2 equivalent reduced over the lifetime of the project. Awardees will have 3 years to implement their projects. And while all projects that reduce emissions are eligible, applications are required to include at least one beneficial electrification or low carbon fuel utilization, carbon capture, or storage, or industrial process emissions reduction project. The awards range from $500,000 to $3.75 million and are calculated based on the amount of carbon saved. And just a little bit more information on the proposals and how they'll be evaluated. So the proposals will be evaluated based on the characteristics of the implementation plan for the projects, the analysis employed to estimate savings, the applicant's experience in executing similar projects and meeting sustainability targets, the impacts to surrounding communities, and then the applicant's pursuit of federal and/or tax credits to support these projects, as NYSERDA is hoping to participate. As these projects move forward, we want to make sure that we're leveraging all the incentives that are available to ensure that the cost is as low as possible. So that's the Commercial and Industrial Carbon Challenge snapshot of that program. If you have any questions, I'm happy to take those now. And if I can't answer them, I'll be sure to connect you with colleagues that can. And I'll also be sure to add my contact information when we distribute slides.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, Matt. And thank you, both to NYSERDA and to the New York City Department of Buildings for these very in-depth and informative presentations. If you're in the audience, you might notice that most of the questions have been answered already from the Q&A in written form. And, furthermore, wanted to thank the audience for being here today. This implementation of Local Law 97, it definitely requires cooperation amongst all of the, people here today. So it's good to know that there are great questions being asked and great answers being provided. I see just a few open questions in the chat. So if my fellow speakers would like to come on camera, maybe we can answer these last few in the time that remains. All right, so we have a question that says, can you help us understand what does cumulative lifetime savings goal mean? Is this calculated based on measure lifetime savings?
Yeah. So I believe it is. Yeah, I think it's likely a measure life calculation. What I'll do is connect you with our industrial team, and they can get you specifics. Yeah, thank you for the question, though.
Thank you so much. And Matt, do you mind putting a contact into email address or something into the chat for everyone? I see that
Absolutely.
DOB has provided its Local Law 97 webpage and also the GHG emissions at buildings.nyc.gov email address. And the Accelerator has provided an intake form if you would like to connect directly with us too. So the other open questions have also been answered in written form. Thank you to everyone for jumping on that so quickly. Last call for any questions or any remaining comments from the speakers, if you wanted to address anything further.
Catherine, if I could just clarify one thing. So
Please do.
The 320, yes, the 320.7 adjustment, of course, is for a building who finds themselves not in compliance, right? So as I said earlier, most buildings we're looking at about, based on benchmarking data, a 90% compliance rate. And of course, those buildings, maybe they in 2030 think they might need this adjustment, and they certainly have, time to think about that at this point. But no need to do that adjustment unless you're out of compliance and then feel like you need the special consideration. The whole point for us to focus on I&M buildings here is to address the issue of the process loads versus the regular building loads, right? The loads used to, do the manufacturing, right? And the industry process, et cetera, and to have that considered separately. And so we're going to definitely be looking to see, well, for the regular building operations, right? How have you done? And then for the separate emissions and operations, have you done, like, what's your plan? Have you done everything that you can do, recognizing there may be limitations? So that's the whole point of this, is to treat it separately. Thank you.
Great. Thank you for those clarifications, Laura. There was a question in the chat that said, can you confirm what the future emissions limits will be for 2035 to 2040 and 2040 to 2050? I believe those are linked within the Article 320 info guide to the rule that established those limits. So that's been answered. Thank you. And I'm not sure, Jacob, what by email means. Maybe you could put a clarifying additional question in the chat.
Catherine, I think that might have been related to whether or not we will be emailing these slides, and I was actually typing a response that yes, we will be sending an email out to everyone who registered for the event, and we'll include a copy of the slides.
Got it. And yeah, I mean, please feel free to, share information with your colleagues in your buildings, people that you work with, your property managers, your building operators, your tenants. It's important that everybody, understand and be on board with these updated opportunities. And then Brian's meant to ask about the electrical coefficient for these time periods. That should also be included in the rules establishing the future.
Actually, we still have to do those coefficients.
Okay.
For those time periods. And
those time periods. Yeah. Okay, that makes sense.
And we will consider them when we assess the state of affairs later on down the line. I forget what the deadline is for when we have to consider them. Right now it's established for the first two.
Great. Will the Q&A be included with the presentation slides? I don't know. That's a good question. Does anybody have an answer to that question?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think
go ahead. Sorry, Simon.
Yeah, I was going to say that hopefully there's a way that we can automatically do that, but if not, we'll find a way to capture these questions and make sure that they're included. That's a really good point.
Yeah, I will say, like, having read through all of the answered ones, for the most part, the questions were answered within the presentations. So the presentations and the documents that are related to them should contain answers to all the things that have been, discussed today, but definitely appreciate that. Anything else from the audience or from the panelists? There's a question about, are you seeing any questions being repeated? So there's a couple of different tabs. There's like the answered questions, of which there are 38. So they're not all the same. Some of them are very, specific, but even with the specificity, I would say that they are addressed in one way or another in one of the presentations that has been recorded and will be disseminated. They range from technical to like general. So, but yeah, you have now the contact information too for DOB, Accelerator, and NYSERDA. So please reach out to us afterwards to talk one-on-one about your specific building, especially if you are like not finding more answers within the available documents and or are not sure what you're seeing in them. So we want to help enable buildings to get into compliance. Many clients are asking if Con Ed will be supplying the needed capacity of if electrification continues. So that is part of this, future-facing process that Laura was referring to. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know, that electrification capacity is being expanded, and it has to be in order for us all to be able to get to carbon neutrality. So I don't know if anybody else wanted to say anything further about that. Great. Okay. Well, we'll give it one more minute and then we might be able to give you back 5 minutes of your time. So thank you again so much to DOB, to my colleague Simon, to NYSERDA, wonderful resources, a lot of information, and a lot that's being, made available in order to help buildings reduce carbon emissions, which is why we're all here. The carbon pollution problem is the reason for Local Law 97 to exist, and buildings being the largest contributor by far is why this is such an important and like groundbreaking law. So thank you all again and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.